The night my life cracked down the middle didn't start with a fight, it started with a toast. I was 22, sitting at the far end of my parents' dining room table in a chair that wobbled every time someone shifted their weight. My grandmother was there, my aunt and uncle, three of my parents' closest friends, and my brother, who was positioned at the center of the table, like a centerpiece nobody wanted to move. My mother had made her good pot roast. My father had opened the wine he only opened for occasions. I remember thinking that was strange, because nobody had told me what we were celebrating. Then my father stood up, raised his glass, and said, "We want to announce that our son has been accepted into Vanderbilt Law School. Full merit scholarship." The room erupted. Glasses clinked. My grandmother pressed her hand to her chest like she might cry. My aunt actually did cry. I clapped with everyone else. I was happy for my brother. I genuinely was. Then my mother looked down the table at me and said, almost as an afterthought, "Sophie also got into nursing school, so that's nice too." My uncle chuckled and said, "Well, someone's got to change the bedpans." My father smiled into his wine. My mother moved on to passing the breadbasket like she'd just mentioned the weather. I sat there with a fork in my hand and a smile that had stopped reaching my eyes, waiting for someone to add something. To say they were proud of me too. To acknowledge that I had also worked hard, that I had also earned something. Nobody did. Before I tell you what happened after that dinner, and how 7 years later I found myself sitting across from my parents in a bank conference room with a stack of documents between us, tell me in the comments. What time is it where you are and what country are you watching from? I want to know how far this story travels. I didn't leave that night. That's the thing people always assume. They hear stories like this and they picture someone dramatically throwing down a napkin and walking out the door. I didn't do that. I drove home to my apartment, sat on the edge of my bed, and told myself it was just a thoughtless moment. That my parents were proud of me, even if they didn't say it. That I was being too sensitive. I told myself that for 3 more months, until the morning I called the financial aid office at my nursing program and asked about the disbursement schedule for the savings account my grandmother had set up for me when I was 7. The woman on the phone pulled up my file and told me, with the kind of flat professionalism that only makes bad news worse, that there was no balance remaining. The account had been fully withdrawn 14 months earlier. I called my mother that same afternoon. She was quiet for a long moment before she said, "We had to help your brother. Law school is expensive, even with a scholarship. You'll be fine, Sophie. You always land on your feet." I asked her when she was planning to tell me. She said, "We didn't think it would be a big deal. It's still in the family." I hung up. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, where I'd just finished a 12-hour shift, and I stared at the dashboard until my vision blurred. Not because I was surprised, exactly, but because somewhere in the back of my mind, I had always hoped I was wrong about how little I mattered in the math of my own family. That withdrawal slip proved I wasn't wrong. I was just quiet about it. The next year was the hardest of my life. I took out loans I hadn't planned on taking. I picked up overnight shifts at a long-term care facility on top of my regular rotation at the hospital. I ate a lot of peanut butter and crackers and called it dinner. I graduated on a Tuesday in May. Neither of my parents came. My mother sent a card with a $20 bill inside it. My father texted the morning after with, "Congrats, kid. We'll celebrate soon." We never did. What I built after that? I built alone. I started as a floor nurse in the cardiac unit at a hospital in Nashville, running 12-hour nights while most of my peers were still figuring out their coffee orders. I was the youngest person on the unit, who didn't flinch during a code. I learned fast, not because I was especially gifted but because I couldn't afford not to be. Every skill I picked up was a brick in a wall I was building between the girl at that dining room table and the woman I was becoming. By the time I was 26, I was working toward my nurse practitioner license. My supervising physician, a blunt woman from Kentucky who had no patience for hesitation but endless patience for effort, told me once that I had the kind of instincts most people couldn't teach. I kept that in my back pocket on the nights when my parents' voices still found me at 2 in the morning. The nights when I lay in the dark of my apartment and heard my uncle's laugh. Someone's gotta change the bedpans. I got my no-problem license at 28. By 29, I had joined a small family practice clinic as a full-time provider. I was seeing my own patients, managing my own caseload, making decisions that mattered. I had a one-bedroom apartment in East Nashville with a window that looked out at a maple tree that turned orange every fall. I had two close friends who would answer the phone at midnight without asking why. I had a savings account with a real number in it, built from nothing but my own hours. On paper, my life was good. Better than good. But you don't just recover from being told you're the afterthought. The body heals faster than the mind does. I'd be in the middle of a perfectly ordinary afternoon, reviewing labs or writing a note, and something small would trip a wire I didn't know was still live. A patient's mother coming in to thank me for taking good care of her kid. The specific way pride looked on someone's face when they talked about their daughter. I'd feel a hollow thing open in my chest and have to breathe through it quietly until it closed again. I had not spoken to my parents in 4 years when my brother called. I almost didn't answer. His name came up on my screen and I stood there in my kitchen watching it ring, one hand around a mug of tea that had gone cold. We weren't estranged exactly. We just existed in the same family the way two satellites can orbit the same planet without ever actually crossing paths. He had graduated law school, passed the bar, joined a firm. My mother sent me updates about him the way she'd announce news about a neighbor's kid. Unsolicited. Delivered without any apparent awareness of the irony. I answered on the last ring. He said, "I need to tell you something before they call you." And then he told me. My parents' financial situation had been deteriorating quietly for years. My father had taken early retirement under circumstances that were less voluntary than the family story made them sound. My brother's law firm, the one he'd joined 3 years out of school with so much ceremony, had dissolved after a senior partner was caught falsifying billing records. My brother had been cleared of any involvement, but the fallout had cost him clients, references, and 2 years of rebuilding. During that time, my parents had quietly taken out a second mortgage on their house, then a home equity line of credit, then another refinance. My brother had found out 6 months earlier when my father called asking him to co-sign a restructuring loan. My brother had said no. Not out of cruelty, he told me, but because he had run the numbers and understood that the house was too far underwater to save through a loan. He'd told them as gently as he could. They hadn't spoken since. "Now," he said, "they're going to call you." I set down my cold tea. "Why me?" I asked, though I already knew. "Because you're stable. Because you have good credit and a real income and a professional license that signals financial reliability. Because you're the one they never worried about, which means you're the one they never used up." The irony hit me somewhere between my ribs. The daughter they'd dismissed as just a nurse was now the only one with enough left to offer them. The one they'd written off as landing on her feet had, in fact, landed somewhere solid. I just hadn't landed anywhere near them. I thanked my brother for the warning. We stayed on the phone longer than I expected. He told me about the 2 years after the firm collapsed, the cases he'd had to refer out, the client who'd screamed at him in a parking lot. I told him about my no-problem boards, about the patient who'd sent me a handwritten letter after I caught something 3 other providers had missed. We talked the way people talk when they've been circling each other for years and finally stopped moving. Before we hung up, he said, "I know it's a lot to ask, but will you at least hear me out when the time comes? Whatever you decide, I want to stand next to you when you say it." I told him I'd think about it. 2 weeks later, a voicemail appeared on my personal phone from a number I hadn't saved but recognized immediately. It was my mother's voice, higher than I remembered, stretched thin over whatever she was trying to hold together. "Sophie. It's Mom. I know it's been a while. We need to talk. It's important. Please call back." I listened to it twice. Then I saved it without calling back and went to bed. 3 days after that, someone rang my apartment buzzer at 7 in the evening. I was in my scrubs, halfway through leftover soup, barely 20 minutes off a shift that had started before dawn. The buzzer went off once, twice, then again, in a pattern that didn't feel like a delivery driver. I pressed the intercom. "Who is it?" A pause. Then my mother's voice, thin and strange through the static. "It's us, Sophie. Please let us up." I stood in my kitchen with my hand still on the intercom button for long enough that the soup went cold. Then I pressed the door release. They looked older. I don't know what I expected, but I wasn't prepared for how much 7 years could rearrange a person. My mother had lost weight she didn't have to lose, and gained a fragility around her eyes that I'd never seen before. My father's hair had gone fully white at the temples, and his shoulders had rounded in a way that made him look like he was bracing for something. They stood in my doorway, holding themselves carefully, the way people hold themselves when they know they're not welcome, but came anyway. I stepped back. "Come in." They moved through my apartment the way tourists move through a museum, careful not to touch anything. My mother's eyes swept the room and landed on the framed "No Problem" license on the wall, then on the medical reference books on my shelf, then on the small corkboard above my desk, where I'd pinned a note one of my patients had written me. Her expression cycled through something I couldn't name. My father sat down at the kitchen table without being invited. My mother followed. I stayed standing. "You look well," my mother said. I didn't say anything. My father cleared his throat. "Sophie, we're not here to fight. We're here because we need your help. The situation with the house has gotten complicated." "I know about the situation," I said. "I know about the second mortgage, and the HELOC, and the refinances. I know about the restructuring loan, and I know you already asked my brother." My mother's eyes cut to the side. "He called you. He warned me," I said. "There's a difference." My father pressed on. "We're not asking you to fix everything. We're asking you to co-sign. One document. Your income and credit rating would be enough to get the loan approved. We could keep the house, get back on a payment plan, and you'd never even know it was there unless something went wrong." "Unless something went wrong," I repeated. He nodded like that settled it. I pulled out a chair and sat down. "I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer me straight." My mother said, "Of course. When Grandma set up that savings account for me, what did she tell you it was for?" The room shifted. My father looked at the table. My mother's hands moved in her lap. "She set it up for your education," my mother said finally. "For my education specifically? She said it was for both of you. We used what we could." "You used all of it," I said. "And you used it for his law school after he got a full merit scholarship that was supposed to cover tuition." "There were expenses," my father said. "Living costs, books. It wasn't just tuition." I put a folder on the table between us. I'd prepared it 2 days after my brother's call, the same way I'd learned to prepare for difficult patient conversations, not out of anger but out of precision. Inside were printouts. The account statement showing the full withdrawal and its date. A copy of my brother's scholarship award letter, which I'd found in a box of old documents my grandmother had sent me before she passed. A printout of the second mortgage filing and the HELOC application, both pulled from public county records. "I went to nursing school on loans that are still not fully paid off," I said. "I worked nights at a care facility for 2 years on top of my regular shifts. I graduated with no one in the audience. I built everything I have from a zero balance and a borrowed study guide." My mother's eyes went wet. "We didn't think you needed it the way he did." I held her gaze. "Or you didn't think I was worth the same investment." "That's not true," my father said. "Then what is true? Because from where I'm sitting, the math is pretty clear. You took what was mine, gave it to him, told everyone I was fine because I always land on my feet, and spent the next 7 years not calling unless there was a holiday. And now you're here because you need my credit score." The silence was long enough to hear the couple upstairs walking across their kitchen floor. "We made mistakes," my mother said. Her voice cracked on the last word. "I know we did. I know I didn't say the right things. That dinner, what your uncle said, I should have told him to stop. I should have said something. I've thought about it." She paused. "But we're still your parents, and we're asking you for help." For the first time since they'd walked in, I felt the old pull. The one that had kept me quiet for years. The one that mistook guilt for love and obligation for loyalty. I felt it, and I recognized it, and I let it move through me without grabbing onto it. I told them I would come to the bank meeting, that I would sit across the table and listen, but that I was making no promises, and that before we walked into that room, I needed them to hear some things they'd never let me finish saying. My father started to speak. I held up one hand. "This is the only condition. You sit here and you listen. All of it. No interrupting. No telling me you did your best. No counting what you provided against what you took. Just listening. If you can't do that, you can find your own way to the elevator." They stayed. So I told them. Not to punish them. Not because I wanted to watch them feel bad, but because I had carried those years alone, and they had never once asked what that actually cost. I told them about the winter I couldn't afford a coat and wore 2 sets of scrubs to my car in the parking deck. About the patient who coded on my 3rd solo night shift and how I drove home afterward and sat in my parking lot for 40 minutes before I could walk upstairs because I had no one to call. About passing my boards and not telling them because I'd gotten so used to absorbing my own milestones quietly that celebration felt like a foreign language. My father stared at the table for most of it. My mother wept without making a sound. When I finished, she said, "We didn't know it was that hard." "You didn't ask," I said. "That's different from not knowing." They left that night with nothing decided. I texted my brother when the door closed. He responded in under a minute. "I'll be there. Whatever room, whatever time." The bank meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning at a branch downtown. I wore my work clothes, dark slacks, a blazer, the kind of outfit I wore when I had to give a patient news they weren't ready for. My brother was already in the lobby when I arrived, standing with his hands in his coat pockets, looking like he hadn't slept well in a week. He probably hadn't. We didn't say much before going in. We didn't need to. The conference room was small and over-air-conditioned. A loan officer sat at the head of the table, a man in his 50s with a legal pad and the measured patience of someone who had sat through many difficult family conversations and stopped being surprised by any of them. My parents were already seated on one side. My brother and I took the other. My father smiled when he saw us both. The reflexive smile of a man who was used to reading a room and adjusting accordingly. He looked at me like I was already on his side. The loan officer walked through the terms, the amount, the interest rate, the repayment schedule. He explained, in the careful language of liability, what it would mean for me to attach my name and assets to the agreement. He asked me directly if I understood the risk. I told him I did. And then I told him I had some context that was relevant to the conversation. I put the folder on the table. I walked him through each document the same way I'd walked my parents through them 2 nights earlier, but this time the room had a witness. Someone whose job required him to care about facts and disclosures and the actual financial picture behind the application. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't editorialize. I just laid out what I had. When I finished, the loan officer set down his pen and looked at my parents. He asked them whether the savings account withdrawal was accurate. My mother said they'd made decisions they regretted. He asked whether the attempted account application in my name, which my brother had discovered and shared with me, had been authorized. My father said it had been a misunderstanding. The loan officer wrote something on his legal pad. My brother spoke next. He was quiet but precise, the way people are when they've rehearsed the exact distance between emotion and fact. He said that he had been present for many of the decisions described, that he had not understood at the time what was being taken from me but that he understood now, that he was not willing to sign and would not encourage me to do so. My father turned to him. "After everything we sacrificed for you." My brother didn't raise his voice. He said, "I know what you sacrificed. I also know what you told me about Sophie to justify it. That she didn't need it as much. That she wasn't as focused. That she'd be fine. You built a story about her that made it easier to take from her, and I believed it for too long because it benefited me. I'm not doing that anymore." The silence that followed had weight. My mother looked at me across the table. Her eyes were red at the edges. "Sophie, if we lose the house, I don't know what we'll do. Everything we built is in that house. All our memories. Your father's health hasn't been great. I can't manage a move at this stage of our lives." I heard her. I let it land. I said, "I spent 7 years managing things you never thought to prepare me for. Moving is hard. Starting over is hard. But it's survivable. I know because I've done it." I looked at the loan officer. "I won't be signing." He nodded. His expression didn't change. He said he would connect them with a housing counselor who could help them understand their options, which included a structured sale, a short sale, and a negotiated resolution with the mortgage servicer. He said none of those options were easy but that they were real. My parents left first. My mother paused in the doorway and looked back at me with an expression I had no clean name for. Not quite anger, not quite sorrow. Something older and more complicated than either. She said, "I hope you know how much I love you." I said, "I hope someday you understand that love and the way you treated me are 2 things that need to match." Then she was gone. My brother and I walked to the parking lot together and stood next to my car in the pale November light. "Do you think we did the right thing?" he asked. "I think we did the honest thing," I said. "I think those are different questions." He nodded. He asked if we could get coffee sometime. Not a family event, not a holiday, just coffee. I said yes. Months passed. The house sold at auction to a young couple who, from what my brother said, immediately planted a vegetable garden in the backyard. My parents moved into a 2-bedroom apartment about 20 minutes from where they'd lived for 30 years. My father started seeing a cardiologist who finally got his blood pressure regulated. My mother, according to my brother, cried for 2 weeks and then started volunteering at their church's food pantry on Wednesday mornings, which she had apparently always wanted to do but felt she couldn't because of what the neighbors might think. I didn't show up for the move. That was their chapter to navigate. Mine was different. I had been thinking for a while about the patients I kept seeing who came in with things they'd ignored for too long. Not because they didn't know something was wrong, but because they didn't have anyone who'd showed them how to pay attention to their own bodies, their own worth, their own warning signs. People who'd been taught their whole lives to absorb and push through and not make a fuss. I knew that population better than most. I started a small program at my clinic. One evening a month, we opened our conference room to women who were navigating health decisions without much support. We brought in a counselor, a financial coach, a patient advocate. We called it Your Own Baseline, because that was the thing I wished someone had taught me years earlier, that before you can take care of anyone else, you have to know what normal feels like in your own body, your own mind, your own life. On the first night, 11 women showed up. By the 6th month, we had a waiting list. I'm not telling you this because I want credit for it. I'm telling you because there's a version of this story that ends with the bank meeting and treats that as the point. The refusal as the resolution. But the refusal was only the beginning of something. The real work wasn't saying no to my parents. The real work was learning what I was actually saying yes to when I stopped spending my energy maintaining their story about me. If you grew up being treated like the responsible one who didn't need anything, the one who'd figure it out, the one who could be borrowed from without being asked, you know how long it takes to realize that self-sufficiency was never something you chose. It was something assigned to you because it was convenient for other people. And there is a difference, a real one, between strength you built and a burden you were handed and told to carry alone. Here's what I know now that I wish someone had told me at 22. Sitting at the far end of a table where no one raised their glass for me. You are not obligated to absorb losses that were never your fault. You are not required to rescue people from consequences you didn't create. You can love someone and still decline to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. And the moment you stop performing gratitude for people who never asked whether you were okay, something happens that is quiet and enormous and doesn't look like anything from the outside. You just start taking up the right amount of space. The dining room chair doesn't wobble anymore. I bought my own table. If you made it this far, I want to ask you one thing. Not about my parents, not about the loan. I want to know, what's one thing someone told you about yourself when you were young that you've been quietly carrying ever since? Tell me in the comments. You might be surprised how many people reading your words have been carrying the same thing. From my perspective, this isn't a story about punishing parents or choosing money over family. It's about understanding the difference between being loved and being used. Between someone wanting you in their life and wanting what you can provide. My parents made decisions that treated me as a resource rather than a person. And when the resource ran out for everyone else, they remembered I existed. Saying no wasn't cruelty. It was finally telling the truth out loud in a room where it could be heard. If you were in my position, would you have signed? Or would you have closed the folder and walked out like I did? Let me know below, and if this story reached you somewhere real, share it with someone who might need to hear it tonight.